CUA ACG 535, Work with the Human Form in Creative Practice. This is an elective subject. There's not a separate version at each different qualification level, but quite a few of our diploma students will have this particular unit. So we'll go through this unit, what's required, what's expected. But as I say, this might be a unit that you personally don't have. That's okay. It's not a core unit, which means not everyone is going to have this particular unit. But we also do have, from time to time, I do have students who are maybe enrolled in like a printmaking unit, but then as their as their enrollment carries on, they realize that they either don't have time or they're not interested in doing printmaking or silversmithing or whatever it might be. And people want to swap, a unit of competency, one of their elective units, for something else. So from time to time, I do get people who swap out a different elective unit for this particular unit. So even if you don't have it now, there's a chance you might end up with it a little bit later. So let's have a look-see and start going through this particular unit. First off, we'll have a look at what do we need to produce for this unit. We are producing 2 different bodies of creative work, which means 2 or more artworks, so minimum of 4 in total, which explore the human form as a subject matter. As they are 2 different bodies of work, they will need to explore 2 different approaches and ideas about the human form. So it's 2 sets of 2 pieces, and it doesn't have to be 2, it's 2 or more. So 2 pieces relating to one kind of idea or approach, and 2 pieces relating to a different idea or approach. Now, we will go through what that means as we go through this unit, because it sounds like a lot of work, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of work. You may use any mediums, and your bodies may be clothed or nude. You'll also be required to produce experimentations for this workbook. And so this workbook is best completed alongside Peter Mackey's life drawing class or Matthew Weatherstone's life painting classes. You could also be working with, like Michael Sims has portrait classes, or anyone's portrait classes for that matter. So it doesn't necessarily have to be either of those classes, but if you are doing life drawing classes or life painting classes, there's a good chance that you'll produce quite a few works. And so you give yourself more options in terms of the finished works for this unit. So let's get into it. Step 1, first kind of element, is about researching the human form. So as an introduction to the body and art, I've got an article here that's talking about the history of the nude in art. And so a couple of pieces of terminology that are important. Nude is an idealized or romanticized depiction of an unclothed body. Naked is a depiction of the body with frankness, realism, imperfection, and honesty. So the difference between a nude or someone who is naked is, it's maybe a fine line as a distinction, but there should be a difference if we're talking about where we're painting a nude figure in the nude, or we're painting someone or drawing someone who's painting them or depicting them as naked. 2 slightly different terms. Voyeurism is the act of observing private or intimate acts or moments for gratification. So when you portray the human body, what is your intention? Are you objectifying? Are you empowering? Or are you attempting to do both? Body politics. In art, this is a theory that bodies are political because they're influenced by society and are structures of authority. This idea also concerns itself with the right of individuals versus the right of the collective and bodily autonomy. And then intersectionality and inclusion. More often in current art making and politics, we've been concerned with the inclusion of largely excluded categories of people. For example, we now have intersectional feminism, which includes people of color and people of diverse sexual orientations and backgrounds. And so consider the role of our representation of bodies in contributing to inclusion. So having gone through those sorts of definitions and thinking about those things, it's really considering how historically nude and naked bodies have been represented in art and in the media. And what our, I guess, sort of goals or responsibilities are as artists in terms of how we then continue this tradition of working with nudes, naked bodies, and the human form. Because we can certainly say that looking or making representations of human bodies goes back to the very foundations of art. Some of the earliest images that humans ever produced were of people. And they might have been essentially stick figures, but they were still representations of people and representing the human body within our artworks. And in some cases, especially maybe many hundreds of thousands of years ago in producing those sorts of works, it was more just straightforward representationalism, just trying to depict as simply and clearly as possible that there is a human doing something. So it's a bit more of a kind of narrative way of, telling a story or describing a scene. But then fairly quickly, as we go on then through history and representing the human body, we start to get into other ways of representing the human body. And we start to get into idealized versions of representing the human body, representing gods, deities, representing everyday humans, representing idealized versions, perfect versions of men and women, and what those might be and what constitutes perfection. But then also representing parts of human interest and human sexuality. So some people, producing art very specifically to talk about the things that they are attracted to or interested in, or that they are disgusted by or, opposed to. So all of this is all tied into the way that we represent the human form. And even if we ourselves are thinking, yeah, but the work that I'm doing is not particularly political, it's not particularly, it's not particularly radical, I'm not trying to do anything that's making a statement. In just producing art, you are still part of, a lineage, you're still part of the history of art. And so whether or not you are conscious of it, whether or not you're aware of it, there are social, political, personal kind of aspects that are going to affect the way that you produce work relating to the human body. And it can also be about yourself. It can be quite personal. It can be very profound. It can be very simple. It can be very straightforward. So there's a lot to think about when we talk about representing the human body. This article that I've got here, this gives us a little bit of a timeline of the nude in Western art and its beginnings in antiquity. So there's a lot of examples here going back to, ancient Greece and Greek and Roman sort of statues. There's a lot more history here, so you can go through that and have a read of that. It's very, very interesting. But it's worth understanding as well that other cultures and other areas outside of the Western world have different attitudes and different ways of describing the human form, or in some cases, not describing the human form. Like you could certainly, think about or address the fact that in Islamic art, generally there are no representations of humans and the human figure. And particularly, it's very, particularly forbidden to make any representations of the Prophet Muhammad. If we look at other cultures, if we look at the way that humans have been represented in Japanese art and Chinese art, there's a strong tradition of simplification and or stylization in terms of the way that human forms are represented there. If we look at Indian culture, there's a very specific kind of visual language that goes along with representing different deities and people with strong traditions of different kinds of art forms. So it's not to say that Western art is the most important way to represent humans, or that they've got the market cornered on representing humans. Certainly not. But if we do further investigation, and certainly I would encourage everyone to do so, you can look into the history, you can look into the traditions, and you can look into what's considered to be taboo, what's considered to be valuable, what are the purposes of representing humans, you know, culturally, how have things changed, all of that. It's very, very interesting. There's a very deep well that you can dive into. So having a little look at some examples. Here we have examples of naked versus nude. Two images here, one by Lucian Freud, one by Ingres, and certainly one of them has a less stylized, a less romanticized, a less idealized version of representing the human body, whereas the other one is much more stylized is one way of saying it, but certainly it's a idealized version of the human body. Even though in both examples we've got a figure who is more or less in the same pose. But it's very interesting the way that you know, two separate artists, two separate movements, two separate periods of time, the ways in which these artists have chosen to represent you know, two female figures, similar sort of body type, similar, you know, body kind of structure, similar placement in terms of what they're doing and how they're placed. But one we would describe as a portrait or an image of a naked person, and one we would describe as a nude. So looking at these two examples, give me some fundamental differences in terms of how they are different. And I'm not saying this in the way of, you know, trying to yeah, I'm trying to think how to say that. We don't have to be making comments on people's bodies in terms of whether or not we find them attractive, but let's talk about the ways in which we feel like one is perhaps more realistic, less stylized than the other. So Sophie said one seems more aesthetic than the other. Yeah. Yeah. So in what ways more aesthetic? So the first image, okay, so commenting on the color, the first image is dull, while the other one is filled with color. Yeah. Would we say out of the two images, would we say one is perhaps more kind of realistic though? If they both had, you know, kind of similar weight, similar age, does one seem more probably true to life than the other? Anyone can jump in too, by the way. That's not just a question specifically to Sophie.
Can you just repeat the question once again?
Yeah, I said, which one of the two seems more kind of true to life in terms of, because Sophie mentioned that the image, the coloring on the image on the left-hand side, the Lucian Freud one, the colors seem more dull, while the images on the Ingres one are brighter, more saturated. And I said, out of the two, do we feel like one is more realistic than the other though? more
I
like a
think naked woman has been successful in that because on her body, I can see a kind of purpley tone, which
mm,
feels like bruises.
mm,
And I don't know if it's her skin condition or it really she has underwent something because it's everywhere. I think it's naked woman on sofa compared to the other one.
mm. Yeah, I'll let you in a little secret. White skin often gets that little purpling. It's not bruises.
Sorry, I was
It's
not aware.
no, that's fine. As you were saying it, it occurred to me, I was like, oh yeah, you probably don't have that problem. Yeah, when you're really white, which I'm pretty white, you do get like the veins just below the surface, especially on areas like around hips and thighs and legs. Even so much as I don't have maybe as much as that, but even things like varicose veins, they will have this purplish kind of look to it. So looking at her, I was like, oh yeah, I've seen stuff like that before. That looks like varicose veins on a white chick. Um, but you've gone, oh my God, she's bruised. Poor thing.
Because her expression also matched, and I never knew that about this purple skin. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, as I say, it's not everyone, it's not every bit of skin. But yeah, and to be honest, I'd say she even just looks a bit cold. I think you get some of that purpling when you're cold as well. But yes, that was something. It did also catch my eye. I did look at the purpling, but that's part of what made me think, yeah, that is more kind of realistic, more naturalistic. Because to be fair, I think the other one, the Ingress one, she should have more of something like that. Her skin tone is so beautiful and soft and creamy and consistent, and I don't know anyone who has skin that perfect and that consistent, where there's no stretch marks, there's no sort of variation, nothing that's a bit more purpley, nothing a bit more blue or anything else. She's all perfectly consistent. And the same, I think, if we look at the two faces as well. I would say the one on the left-hand side, the naked woman on the sofa, she's got her features are sort of more angular. There's maybe a more feeling of, slightly bit of jowls developing under the chin. Her eyebrows are a bit out of control. She needs to get a pair of tweezers in there. But if we look at the other one, we look at Ingress's one, A Lisk with a Slave, which also PS, pretty problematic, mate. Calm down. She's got flawless skin, almost to the point of there being no structure to her jaw whatsoever. Like there's no definition of where the underside of her jaw um, meets her neck. It's all the same color, all the same tone. So it's actually flattened because of that. So yeah, so this I think is a good example of naked versus nude in terms of if we are thinking about comparing those two. And if we are kind of comparing the two and then thinking about what is the purpose of representing each of these? Why has the artist chosen in one case, and obviously two different artists, two different decisions, but why has one artist chosen to be much more sort of true to life, and more just putting it all out there, versus the other artists making things a lot more stylized and a lot, smoother, and increasing the color and getting rid of all of the sort of any kind of, blemishes or inconsistencies. What would be a reason for each artist to make that decision? Like why would we, if we ourselves were approaching these works, what would make us choose in one case to represent things as is versus stylizing? Can we think of any reasons why you might do the same sort of thing?
Uh,
Or let me phrase it a different way. Let's say you've got an intention to paint a nude or a naked person, one of the two, which one would you choose? Would you choose to paint someone more realistically and in a more you know, a much more representational way where you're just putting down exactly what you see? Or would you stylize? What would be a decision that you would make? And why do you think you make that decision?
Um, if can I answer if anyone? Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Uh,
If Sophie's going to answer, I think she'll type an answer. I think everyone else just is listening. So go ahead.
so for your first question, I have an answer.
Mm,
That is, I use a shortcut for me to easily understand a painting. Eyes. I call it eyes. I is for intention. What is the intention of the painting? Like, is it for a commission work, or is it, just out of just out of the flow? There's a live painting sitting, and then he just did it out of inspiration. So I try to identify that. Then the C stands for the concept behind it. For example, both of them have two different concepts. So I try to understand the concept, and then the era in which, or the evolution, the time in which the period in which this painting was made, and what were the influences on it. So
yeah.
these are the three things I would look in a painting if when I'm seeing either it be naked, nude, or any other painting.
Mm,
And coming to the second question, all these, because I'm referring to the paintings previously like that. When I am doing a painting, when I choose to do a naked woman, or on a sofa, or if I'll go with slave, it also will depend on these three factors.
mm,
Uh, and mostly the era will be influenced by the concept, what I want to showcase from.
mm.
If I want to bring the elements from the previous centuries, then I will include those elements. But if I want to keep it as fresh as possible, very much related to the current, then I will go with naked woman. So still
Mm.
my terminology, my rule of thumb for eyes will still stand. This is something I just made up. Maybe it gets evolved in the future, but that's how I will approach.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's yeah, it's a really, really interesting way of looking at things. And I think it's sort of slightly off topic, but it's something that I often talk about and think about when I'm discussing whether or not an artwork is successful. And you've probably heard me say this before, but for a long time, as a lot of us do, would sort of look at artworks and think about whether it's good or not. And then at a certain point, I sort of came to a realization that that's very subjective and very personal to say whether I think it's good or not. Because what I'm really saying then probably is, do I like it or not? And whether I like it or not does not make a good assessment of whether or not it is good objectively, because I'm not objective. And so when I do look at an artwork, what I will think about instead is it successful? And my criteria for whether or not it's successful is sort of similar to your ice, is going, well, what was the intention? What was the concept? What was the era? And I think particularly with the sort of the intention and the concept, I'll decide whether or not I think the artwork is successful based on how successfully did it convey the intention and the concept. And so with Naked Woman on the Sofa, if we know that the concept and the intention is to present someone as just as directly as possible, to show someone in a state of vulnerability, to create an atmosphere that's both intimate but also kind of cold, and a little bit sort of strange and uncomfortable, then looking at the artwork just as is, I think, big success. Do I like the artwork from the context of saying, would I hang it on my wall? No, I don't. I wouldn't hang it on my wall. I don't think it's a particularly appealing image to me, but that's fine. That's not, can't be my assessment of whether or not it's good. Is it successful? Yes, successful artwork. And yeah, and I think what's interesting about what you said then too is for yourself. So if you're making the decision about which one would you represent, and saying the intention, the concept, and the era, when you say coming to the decision of saying, well, I'd probably go more likely towards naked woman on a sofa, it is then almost making a bit of a commentary about where we are at in terms of the era now. And also, I guess, where you are at personally as an artist. If you're sort of saying, well, for me as an artist within this era, I want to represent things as they are, as I see them right now. I'm not going to stylize, I'm not going to idealize them. Then that sort of then ties into the earlier thing that I said about understanding, even if we're not conscious of it, how much our current position in the world, our current position in the art world, our current position, within society affects the decisions that we would make. Because I would, if I were to predict which someone would choose, in today's world, I would say probably the one on the left is what the majority of artists would choose to do. So that does seem to therefore be, a trend or a good representation of kind of where we are at culturally and, and socially and politically within the art world. So that's also very interesting too. Excellent. All right, we're going to look at one more slide. And this is so the three, well, not three, but the terms we mentioned before: naked versus nude, voyeurism, and body politics. We'll have a look at some sort of examples of these terms. But this is an example here of voyeurism. This is a sculptural work, three-dimensional work called The Couple by Patricia Pacini. There's a link here to this artwork. So Patricia Pacini is an Australian artist. This one's currently not on display, but it is a sculptural piece. And there's a bit of information here about this one, and a little short video that we can also have a look at.
I imagine that perhaps these are the only two creatures of their kind, and somehow they found each other and escaped. Their location within a caravan is very deliberate. A caravan is a space that is almost a house, but temporary, not rooted in one spot. It's domestic but also mobile, compact and cocoon-like. The caravan carries the connotation of disconnection from the mainstream life, either nomadic or socially excluded. And so the couple have the privacy that their intimacy requires, but also a sense of being outsiders, perhaps even on the run. In a way, this work could be seen as an anti-Frankenstein story. In Shelley's book, the monster's sense of isolation and rejection leads him to beg his creator for a partner, someone he can connect with. Victor Frankenstein's refusal to do this sets off the storm of rage and despair that ultimately leads to the tragedy of the novel. In The Couple, we see a more sanguine outcome, although it's not without a sense of melancholy. These two figures have a sense of self-contained separation from the rest of the world. Ironically, in that way, they are perhaps like every other teenager in the world. They feel alone, unprecedented and unique in their experience of life. However, they may feel alone, but they are young and a couple. And in that sense, they represent the potential of life and energy of youth. They carry the possibility of reproduction and the possibility of a future outside of our control. Even if their origin is within human control, their destiny is in their own hands.
So yeah, there you go. So that's Patricia Pacini's work, The Couple. She is a very interesting artist. She does sculptural works, and she does a lot of sculptural works that are about sort of humanoid, human-like creatures. So this is another one of her works. And they're they're all very interesting. Some of them quite strange, some of them quite creepy, a bit weird. But she's a fascinating artist to look at. And it in some ways kind of ties into discussions that we had even last week with the business of creative practice, thinking about artists who produce works like this, who produce these kind of large-scale sculptural works, and sort of thinking, how are they making a living doing this? You know, who's buying these things? But evidently there is a market for it, and there is, you know, enough opportunities that people can become professional artists doing this style of work. So yeah, we'll talk a bit more about some of those other terms when we come back to this one next week. But in the interim, if you have the opportunity, I would say have a look at some more of Patricia Pacini's work, because yeah, she's very interesting artist and really explores a lot to do with the human form and what makes us human and what should be considered part of humanity and so on. Coming back to what we were talking about last week. So we were talking sort of an introduction to the body and art, and essentially trying to go through some of this terminology that surrounds talking about the body, representations of the body, nude versus naked, voyeurism, body politics, and intersectionality and inclusion. So we sort of had a little discussion about naked versus nude and what we felt like the main differences between these two kind of images are, and images of this sort. Then we had a look at voyeurism with the work of Patricia Pacini. So talking a little bit about then body politics, and so thinking about, you know, how the body is represented within art, how the human body is represented within art. And, you know, that statistic, which may not be completely up to date anymore, but it's still an interesting statistic. Less than 5% of the artists in the modern art sections are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. That's, you know, fairly interesting statistic, that especially women's bodies are often represented in art, and yet women as artists are underrepresented. And maybe that was more true in 1989, but I think it's still fairly true now, that there is, you know, sort of, and I think it's an interesting similar kind of crossover in my mind to the way that a lot of women are expected to be cooks at home, but the majority of recognized chefs are men. And I think that there's a certain amount within the art industry where hobbyist artists, there are a lot of women who are considered to be sort of hobbyist artists, but the amount of recognizable, famous professional artists, the majority are men. And so this is not making like a definite statement one way or the other, or, you know, necessarily trying to incite anger or any kind of emotion about it. But it is interesting to examine those facts and see how we feel about that, whether we, you know, whether we think that that's unfair or whether we think that that's perfectly fine. Different people are going to have different reactions to that kind of, you know, those kinds of thoughts and these facts. Body politics, that's sort of part of what comes into thinking about, talking about body politics. We go back to the definition here. So the way that bodies are, that representation and ideas of bodies are political because they're influenced by society and structures of authority. And it's also about the rights of the individual versus the rights of the collective and bodily autonomy. So there's been a few over the years, but sort of famous performance art pieces where people have made themselves physically very vulnerable, and allowed other people to, sort of do whatever they like, to the other person's body, which is extremely, vulnerable, and in some cases very scary. And I think they're often very thought-provoking artworks. I've got a little video here, which is maybe less deep and philosophical, but it's still certainly kind of fun and interesting, which is Smack McCrenna. And I follow her on Instagram. She's very fun. She's a fantastic dancer and performance artist. But yeah, thinking about movement and representations of the body through movement. I'll just put the sound up on this. So this is a series that she's done, taking TikTok of hydraulic objects being crushed by a hydraulic press, and then she's done physical representations of it with her body.
I'm a player. BBS chains, watches and brains, blowing that cash up.
Ah, she's so much fun. Oop, we're back. Okay. So yes, obviously lots of fun to watch, but also very interesting from the perspective of, you know, using the body in a way that's, you know, representing other kinds of objects, thinking about movement, thinking about the ways that we observe the body. I think, honestly, my favorite bits of any of those videos is where she kicks a shoe or her hat off. She's so clever. Have a look at her on Instagram. It is easy to get lost just watching her doing hilarious dance videos. But coming back to very serious art, coming back to more serious art topics. This is also, this is another artist when we're looking, you know, thinking about, again, the human body, representations of the human body within the world, within the context of art as well. This artist, and there's quite a few artists who sort of work in this genre, but is an artist who does extremely realistic body painting to sort of camouflage and put himself within, you know, different kinds of contexts. And it's interesting then, I suppose, if we're thinking about representations in the human body, what happens in the absence of the human body, or if a human is sort of infused within, you know, some other kind of space. There's also another artist, Vanessa Beecroft. She's quite interesting. She's had some controversies over her artistic career, which, to be fair, you know, a lot of artists have also had controversies with their artistic careers. But she looks at things like fashion and modeling, and her works are often very personal, but explore the gap between the observer and the observed. So she has quite, or she's done a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Performance art pieces and installation pieces involving models and involving the human form. But she's apparently very sort of rigid, and very quite sort of strict with her models in terms of what they are allowed and not allowed to do, and the way that they are expected to sort of behave and interact. So there's a real tension between her as an artist and the subjects that she's using or representing, and then also the audience, and how all of those three kind of things intersect. So there's another short video here, which is a performance art piece, sculpture at Deitch Studios, Long Island City. And so this particular piece, we can see a little bit of an artist statement here, works in the space between painting, sculpture, performance, and real life. She's created gesso sculptures cast from live models resting on coffin-like bases. And then there are live models in the performance as well, who are in white body makeup. At the beginning of the performance, they will be indistinguishable from the castural subjects, so sculptural cast, sorry. And then it's pushing the confusion between sculpture, performance, and real life. It's inspired by the funerary sculpture of the Renaissance. I feel like I was going to say, I feel like the camera person made a real choice on that angle.
This seems like voyeurism to me.
Yeah. So, what do we think about that? I heard Jane sort of say, you know, it seems like voyeurism. And yeah, I think there is certainly a strong voyeuristic component to it. Bhavani just said, these kinds of performance art really confuse me. That's absolutely a valid valid comment. But I think it's sort of worth talking about a little bit. What is it that, you know, and in the work that we tend to do at our art school, I would say a lot of it is very traditional, and a lot of it is very academic, meaning that we are following you know, the sort of traditional methods that have come from generations upon generations of artists. And we work with, in some ways, the sort of the fundamentals of drawing, painting, silversmithing work, printmaking work. So you could almost describe, I suppose, if we were to think about it in terms of like music, then a lot of what we do is kind of like classical music. So it's working with lots of different instruments. It's you know, creating pieces that are built off the traditions of artists who have come before, some of them going all the way back to the Renaissance. In some cases, maybe if we're looking at things that are more like impressionists, artists, and sort of working, being inspired by them, maybe that's being a bit more inspired by blues musicians or rock musicians. When it comes to these more sort of performance art pieces, or more sort of I guess artworks that are less academic, less kind of classically inspired, and more avant-garde, then we're kind of, if we can put it into music terms, then maybe it's becoming like punk music, or maybe it's a bit more like freeform jazz music. And it is a bit more kind of confusing. It's not as obvious or is clear what the intention is, or what the mood is, or what the feeling is. And I guess fundamentally it does bring me then back to, which we were talking about either last week or the week before, Bhavani as well, is, you know, what is the purpose, what is the intent, and has that intention been expressed? Something that I do think about, which I think I said last week too, is I sort of, in a lot of ways, I don't know where the funding is coming from, and that may be, you know, that shouldn't necessarily be our first thought when we're talking about art. But at the same time, if we are trying to live as artists, and if we are trying to, you know, exist in a society that requires us to pay bills and, you know, pay for our rent and so on, then it is still a valid, you know, kind of comment and thought, is how are people monetizing what they're doing in a situation like this? And to be honest, in some cases, I don't know. I assume that they're either being funded by galleries or by councils, or you know, receiving grants, or being privately funded, or they're monetizing videos made of the installation processes. But then works like this go back, you know, for generations upon generations, much further back, before things like YouTube would allow people to monetize videos. So how were they making money off of it then? Honestly, I'm not 100% sure. But in terms of what is the purpose, what is the intent, let's kind of talk about it a little bit. So imagine you were in that kind of scenario. You've walked into this exhibition. You know, what you see in front of you is what looks like primarily a lot of women on the floor, nude and or naked, depending on which way we're sort of viewing it. And then as we're watching, some of them begin to sort of move and adjust and move around. What would your feeling be? What would your impression be? It can be positive or negative. You can be as critical as you like, or you can be as, you know, supportive as you like, but just let's sort of share our thoughts about it.
I'll speak.
Yeah.
So firstly, my reaction is they're all women, so that annoys me. Then I think, oh, it's interesting seeing the difference between the living one and the non-living one, you know, particularly the one where you could see her eyes were open.
Yeah.
And you sort of thought, oh, you know, you could see that essence of life in her compared to the ones that weren't alive. But I felt sort of mixtures of anger that it was exploiting women. I thought those poor models, they'd be cold, they might want to go to the toilet, they have to lie there, they have to be naked. They're being exploited by the artist and by all the people watching them. So I felt sort of a bit of hostility towards the artwork because of that.
Yeah.
And I don't know that they necessarily needed to be naked. I mean, you could have got the same effect with them having pants on, you know, like, and also you point out the angle of the cameraman. So that's why I thought it was a bit voyeuristic. And I thought, well, you'll get people to come and pay money to look at this because it's so, you know, naughty and out there, and they can pervert all the bodies. So that was my reaction. I mean, I can see that perhaps the difference between alive and statues, and the fact that you're watching and staring at them and waiting to see which one moves, and but I didn't like it. It's you know, I don't, I'm open-minded in that it's a bit like Yoko Ono's work about where she sat on the stage and people were invited to come and cut the clothes off her till she was naked, which you mentioned. It's a similar sort of thing. I just feel like it's exploiting women's bodies a bit. Yeah.
And yeah, and I think it is, but I guess does it change your feeling at all if that was sort of the point of the artist was making? And you know, if we understand that the models were paid to be there, they weren't just, you know, volunteering, they all knew what they were getting into, and they were, you know, purposefully engaging in this activity to make a point about voyeurism and as you say, people coming and having a perv and wanting to make a statement about that rather than it just being a passive experience. Would that change your feeling about it or not really?
I just think it's a bit sad. Yeah, I can see that point. I just think it's a hard way to make the point, but yeah, I just feel really protective of. I feel this sort of sense of you shouldn't have to do that to get paid, you know. But perhaps I'm just naive. I don't know.
No, I don't think it's about that. And like I said, it's not, having this conversation is not about me or anyone else saying, oh, you're wrong, why would you say
I
that?
know.
Not at all. It's very much, it's because I think that, and this is something that's worth all of us understanding, is that our intention with artwork is not necessarily going to correlate with the way that people interpret our artwork. We might have some purpose or some meaning that we're trying to give our artwork, and it might be less, kind of controversial or less in your face than that artwork was. But we might even think that the artwork we're producing is, really innocuous and very straightforward, and someone else is interpreting it as being, in a very different way, and they're interpreting it as being very controversial. So we don't always have control over people's reactions. So it's interesting to hear what people's reactions are, because there are things that we can learn from that. But we can also find things out about ourselves, and our own feelings about things and our own responses to things. And that can inform how we then go about producing art ourselves. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I feel that it's good that they are out there enough to actually do the, oh, my stupid cat just jumped on the table. Have a show like that and let her do these things. I mean, it's not censored, and so I think that that's good, that she can actually do that piece. But it doesn't mean that I feel comfortable with it.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Did anyone else want to share their thoughts or feelings about it?
Hi, I'm Bhavani.
Hi, Bhavani.
I completely agree with Jane on this. And but I had I had a similar based on this performance art. When I was in drama, and we had met this director, and he was a revolutionist, and he said, so we were doing something like this, with the clothes on. So, and then we just had one session of workshop, and then he said, you will be put in a well, and then you have to start screaming from there and do the action. And we didn't know what the script was. We didn't know what the concept was. And then we did that, and the show was over, and we didn't know what happened. And then when we came back, we asked him, and then he said, when they do revolution, when they do, when they fight in the streets and they have to make a point in the villages, the police will be following them, and so they have only like 3 minutes or 4 minutes of time, and they have to make it impactful. So they have to cut it short to 2 to 3 scenes, and make the act impactful and thoughtful, rather than having an in detail play, because they had to perform and keep running when the police come. So whatever time they get, they have to perform it. And so when we asked him, what did we do, why are we sitting in the well shouting and screaming, and what messages? So he said, this is how we used to do when we were a part of some revolution he was supporting. And the director said that and that was quite interesting. And some of these performance arts, well, not specifically this one is, I felt it was it was exploiting, and I didn't understand any concept. I couldn't make anything out of it. I'm sorry, but yeah, yeah. Well, as Jane said, they could have done it with at least their underwears on. Yeah, but otherwise, a lot of these performance arts, every time I see, and I don't understand, but I still think about what that director has said. Yeah, yeah. This one.
Yeah. Sorry, you go.
Oh, that's it.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that to get your your concept across, to get the impact as communicated as quickly as possible, sometimes you may need to go to a bit of an extreme. But as I say too, I think that there's within the sort of in the realm of the art school that we work in, we are fairly classical in our approach. Most of the tutors and most of the school, what we teach is going to be much more of that sort of classical academic style. So it is a bit outside of our scope, I suppose, to kind of understand it. But that's why it's good to examine our feelings and and see what we can get out of it. Lucinda said, not saying this is the case here, but I can't help but feel that most artists can easily get away with outrageous or controversial pieces by hiding behind the fact that it's art or up for interpretation so as to not get into trouble. Yeah, look, I think that's fair. I think it's fair to say that there is a fair amount of disingenuousness that happens within the art world. And fundamentally, the art world, can be pretty weird. It can be pretty off the wall. The easiest example to bring up in recent memory is the banana that's been taped to a wall and how much money that sold for. There's so many, the spectrum of what is considered to be art covers such a huge range of things, and it is easy enough, I think, as with any industry really, for charlatans or for people who are just trying to make a quick buck to do things and say, well, it's art, so therefore it's acceptable. And ultimately, I think what we can come away with is not necessarily, and this isn't to say you can't criticize things. You should absolutely criticize things as much as you feel comfortable with doing. But what I think about for myself is I sort of come back to, well, what do I want to do? What do I want to communicate? And, can I learn anything from this? Even if all I learn is, well, I'm not going to do that, then that's a good lesson to have learned. But yeah, I think there are, and it's not just the visual art world. There are some pretty out there artists doing very out there things in pretty much every creative field. There's a lot of musicians who are doing really weird, wild, abstract, strange, physical, horrific, disgusting, outrageous things, and calling that music or calling that art. There's some very controversial writers out there, some very controversial filmmakers. So, and how much of that is someone trying to make a valid point and speaking from the heart, or trying to enlighten other people, trying to move other people, trying to educate, and how much of that is people who are just, a bit gross or weird, getting their rocks off. Who knows? There's no definite split between those two groups of people. I think we're likely to come across both within our experiences. But we can also take it or leave it when it comes to art. We can decide for ourselves whether or not we're prepared to engage with it, whether we're interested in it, whether we want to support the people who are producing the art. We do have that opportunity, that ability.
I think my problem with the one that we watched, it doesn't make the point in my mind. They're just doing the thing that isn't good. There's no hope or change in the piece. There's just the exploitation. There's not like they then, clothed the women or gave them back their personality, or, it just was the nothingness. which I don't think makes a point at all. It's just ew. Like,
Yeah.
you gotta have something else, something to be like, you know, to encourage people. You know, what do we want? Do we want these women to then be loved and seen as they are? There's no next step, and that's what I think is missing from that artwork, personally.
Yeah, look, I think that's fair to say too, and it's something that something I actually did sort of think of, which it was a conversation I was having with someone else a couple of weeks ago, without getting too sort of dark and heavy. But I said to one of my friends, you know, maybe it's just the time of life that I'm in, but I'm at the point now where I am not interested in seeing like aggressive or sexual assault of women in TVs and movie anymore. I feel like I've seen so much of it, and it's so often for the purposes of creating a narrative where it's like, well, this woman now has to overcome this, or even particularly when it's in the purpose of inspiring a man to defend the woman who has been assaulted. And I just feel like, you know what, it's been done now. We've done it plenty of times. We've shown it plenty of times. I don't know that we need to keep, you know, really representing that, do we? Why? You know, what are we adding? What are we adding to the world by continually representing the same thing over and over again for the same purpose? And as you say, you know, even if there is some hopeful outcome that comes from it, I just, and maybe there's a similar thing with this where it's like, well, yeah, okay, so we've done that now. We've represented nude bodies in a way that shows vulnerability and exploitation. We've done it many, 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 many times. So can we do something else? Can we build on that? Can we move that forwards, as you say? Can we see these women now being loved or appreciated, or something else that takes us to another step, rather than continually getting stuck at that same, you know, position? Yeah.
I think that the representation is important, but it goes to a certain extent. We don't need to get really graphic in seeing all the details, because we've seen that, and it feels like it's just aiming towards exploiting women. But when you do have that representation, and when it is done well, it can be powerful to move the story along. I just think I don't like when they show it really graphically, and I find that unnecessary.
Yeah.
I think there's a fine line between it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think I think it's, if you're, you know, in some ways I think of it in the same way as the way that I see comedy evolving, you know, and this is starting to get a little bit more political in some ways, but I see quite a lot of comedians who sort of go, oh, you can't joke about anything now. And I think, well, no, you can. It's just that the tired old subjects that people were making jokes about that weren't actually that funny in the first place because they were punching down, we've sort of decided that was all just, you know, very unkind and cruel and lazy. And there are plenty of people who can make extremely funny jokes that don't, you know, victimize or target anyone, but are just very, you know, clever or absurdist or whatever it is. And I think about it in, that's that same kind of way. It's like, well, if you are going to talk about these things, represent these things, you know, present these things, you don't have to be lazy about it. You don't have to just be like, oh, look at this, oh, it's so shocking, and oh, it's so controversial. Because we've seen that many, many, many times, and we get it, and maybe we can advance on that. Maybe we can improve on that. Maybe we can move on, you know. So look, this is, as I say, this is all important stuff for us to think about as artists, because particularly as we are developing as artists, we're trying to find our space as artists, what we want to represent, how we want to represent it. And a lot of us are going to work with the human form, whether it's just because in your classes you are given a specific topic or a specific reference by a tutor that is of the human body, or because you choose to do so. And so thinking about your relationship to that, thinking about your relationship to the model or to the person that you're painting, and thinking about their position within our society and all of these elements, and what are you going to represent, how are you going to represent it. That's all stuff that we need to be quite thoughtful about, rather than just, accidental. Excellent. We'll have a little look now at intersectionality and inclusion. So, and again, this is sort of thinking about the ways that representations of the human body and discussions about human bodies have evolved over time, particularly inclusivity and intersectionality is considering how often, white, so not just female bodies, but white female bodies tend to be represented. If we go back a few slides, as we looked at this one, odorless with slave, it's having, a black person in the background who has absolutely no agency. They don't even have a name. And if we look throughout the history of Western art, there is so much of this. There is such a lack of representation for other peoples, other cultures, and there is a lot of a lot of whitewashing essentially in art and representations of the human body. I mean, a very, very good example of that is how Jesus, even though Jesus is not female, but the way that Jesus is represented in art, particularly from Da Vinci's point onwards, he was essentially represented as a blonde-haired Italian man, possibly actually based off Da Vinci himself. So when we think about not just human bodies, but we also think about the context of feminine bodies, the representation of different ethnicities, we think about the cultural impacts and cultural representations of those bodies. There's a lot of different things that we can consider and as part of our art. And when we are, as artists, representing other people's bodies, having consideration for who they are and their context, their cultural context or their personal context is very important as well, especially if they are a different kind of person to us. It doesn't have to be controversial. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be, like a huge statement that you're making, but it should be done with some level of sensitivity and with some level of consideration. So two examples that we have here. Rachel Gadsden. So she celebrates unrepresented disabled bodies in her art making, challenging ideas about strength and athleticism. And then Latai Tamayapia, exploring the bodily experience of people with colour and people of colour, I should say, and challenging standards of beauty relating to skin tone. And within our school as well, we do have people from different kind of ethnic and different cultural backgrounds. So I'd be very interested to hear if anyone wants to, speak to that, speaking to representations of the human body relating to, possibly their own experience. And this can also include the experience of a female body, but also any other aspects which might relate to the way that you represent other people's bodies, the way you represent your own body, anything like that, if anyone wants to contribute.
I want to go first.
Yeah.
So it's very true. I come from an Indian ethnicity, and it's very true. White female paintings, nude paintings are more
predominant across, though. But nudity is not new in India because we have everywhere on our temples. But there was a different purpose for that being sculpted onto the temples, because people wanted to give up on families, and so they wanted to encourage families, sex, and kids. So that's how the nudity came onto the temples, because everyone used to go visit temples. But coming to other aspects, for a very long time, there was a defined, in fact, I think last 6 years or 7 years, things started changing, but there was a very defined mindset of how a human, especially a female figure, should be, and how it is celebrated, while you are, yes, how you look, or what color you are, because we were colonized for a really long time. So the mindset has become so much so that, the fair skin is the beautiful skin. And I have seen people on the first hand being, really being bullied for their color, skin color, or I was bullied for my body type, because I was a dancer and I was rejected many times to perform on the stage because of my body type, irrespective of what I can do. So yes, there is a mindset which is slowly changing, which is now I see even in the ads that different body types, different color, different ethnicities are also included in their marketing, in the product marketing. So I see there's a shift, but I still see a majority of mindset is still the same. It's not, but there's a start somewhere. So now it is more easy for me to go on a stage and dance than when I was in my teens, because I had to fight with a lot, with my own teachers. I had to make deals and fight to get onto the stage because I was looking a certain way I was looking. So yeah, these things, these things have been there for a really long time, and yeah, and it's still there, and it's still there. The discrimination is still there, and with the bodies and the color and a lot of things, but not it doesn't go with everyone, but it is only a few. Yeah, there's a few groups. There's always few groups everywhere, so we should not ignore that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, good, thank you. It's and as I say, it's interesting to think about and hear other people's perspective on it. I think a lot of there's, and this then ties into the intersectionality sort of part, is that a lot of women across different cultures will experience certain amounts of discrimination or bullying or expectations about their bodies, but the layering of then other aspects like cultural or ethnic backgrounds, it does also then intersect with the way that you are treated or the way that you are expected to be or to appear or to act. So certainly I think, in terms of my own body, I've never been particularly comfortable in my own body, and it's only been in the last sort of few years that I've managed to sort of finally feel comfortable within myself. But growing up, I was always made to feel very uncomfortable with my size and the way that I looked. And even a few years ago, I went up to the Gold Coast to visit my family, and I basically just had forgotten to shave my armpits. Like it wasn't, they weren't particularly hairy, but it had been about a week. And one of my family members commented on it and said, oh, why haven't you shaved your armpits? Is this a feminist statement? And it wasn't. But I said, well, it wasn't, but kind of now it is, because you felt, compelled to actually comment on my body like that. And I sort of, about a day later, another family member commented on my unshaven armpits. And I thought, well, you know what? For every person who comments on it, I'm going to add a week where I don't shave. And by the time my holiday was up, there was 6 weeks had been added to the amount of time that I decided I wasn't going to shave my armpits, because 6 different people had took it upon themselves to comment on my armpit hair. And so after that, I thought, well, I'm just not going to bother shaving it again, because I got quite comfortable with it being long. And I haven't shaved it since. And it's been probably close to 10 years now. But that being such a simple thing, this level of expectation and the level of the level of, so what I'm looking for, like access, no, the entitlement that people felt to comment on my body and say, why haven't you done this? I thought that's just so, it's crazy, you know, and especially there was also a moment that I had probably when the hair had finally completely grown out. I thought, I've never actually seen what my armpit hair looks like. I started shaving my armpits when I was, you know, quite young, when I was probably 13, the first time I started seeing any hair. And it did suddenly occur to me that if I shave them forever, I would never see what my armpits actually look like naturally. And that's quite weird when I thought about it like that. I thought it's the same thing like if we were raised in a culture where it was expected that you always shave your head and then you never actually see what your head looks like with hair on it. That would seem quite weird to us. And so the first time I grew it out completely, I went, wow, this isn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. And then now I've become really comfortable with it. So much so that when people do clock it at the gym or wherever, if I'm wearing short sleeves and people sort of see that I've got armpit hair, when I see them see it and look either surprised or disgusted or whatever it is, I find it quite funny, because it just doesn't bother me anymore. And it used to really bother me, seeing other people with other women or female presented bodies with armpit hair. Used to make me very uncomfortable. I used to think it was, you know, gross or disgusting or whatever. And now I don't care at all. In fact, I do see occasionally younger people with armpit hair, and I sort of want to give them a high five and just go like, good for you. You do you. So yes, that's one small example, slightly funny example, but just I guess, yeah, a strange situation where realizing that people felt quite entitled to, you know, comment on my body and pass their expectations onto my body as well. It's the same with my legs. I haven't shaved my legs since then either. But I am naturally pretty hairless on the legs, so that's not as noticeable. But yeah, armpit hair, long and luxurious. Ari said hair keeps you warm in winter anyway. It does. And look, here's a hot tip for anyone who's thinking about doing it. I'm quite a sweaty person. So especially when I go to the gym, when I do any kind of physical activities, I start sweating immediately. When I used to put deodorant on, and I just put it on bare skin, it would wash off immediately. You know, well, not wash off, but I would sweat it off immediately. Now that I actually have hair there, the deodorant sticks to the hair and then I don't smell. So I actually smell less now than I did when I used to shave my armpits. So there you go. I'm a big advocate for it. But also, if you don't want to, if you want to shave your armpits, you do that as well. Good for you.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, go
I
for
don't
it.
shave my armpits or legs either. No, I never have.
Yeah.
But I've worked for over 40 years in an operating theatre. So I spend my days with naked people of all ages, and all shapes and sizes. And the thing, when you think about art, most of the nudes or naked are within a certain age bracket. You don't see many naked children. If we represent naked children, we can be accused of being paedophilias, or there was that photograph some years back of an adolescent, naked adolescent child, and the photographer got into trouble. So when you think about it, most bodies represented in art are within a certain age group, and they're usually attractive bodies. They don't like have a cesarean scar or one breast missing or, you know, one leg missing, like, but except this piece you've got there by Rachel Gadsden, she's addressing that. But even that one of the girl doing the spray tan, she's quite attractive, you know, it's an attractive body. So that I think generally in the world where I see bodies, most of them aren't as attractive as the ones in works of art. And I think it has influenced me. You're saying about, you know, not shaving your armpits and stuff. It's influenced me as a person in that I don't wear any makeup. I just am happy just to be who I am and you know, not shave my armpits and all that sort of thing. And I think it's probably because I've been exposed to so many people at their most vulnerable all through my life, and it's just affecting the way I see the world. I probably see it differently to the rest of you. And I think it affected the way I reacted to that piece with the naked girls, because I immediately wanted to cover them up and protect them when they're vulnerable, because when a patient's unconscious in an operating theatre and naked, you feel for them and you look after them and you cover them up so that people can't see them. So I had those sort of reactions to that piece. And it's interesting because that was supposed to be live art. Could the audience have gone in and covered them up if they wanted? Are they allowed to do that? You know, I started thinking about that. But she's saying it's the interaction between real life and sculpture and stuff. And I thought maybe she was inviting us to go in and cover them. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it was funny because when I was watching it as well, I think I had one of the same thoughts as you, which is like, gosh, that looks cold. Like they're on cement floors, and I was just thinking, laying there for such a long time on cold cement floors, like, and also maybe this is indicative of, you know, of I think I told you I've got like osteoarthritis in one of my hips and one of my knees. So I was just going, oh God, I wouldn't be able to get back up again. If I was laying there cold for that long. I find it very, very uncomfortable. But yeah, it's I do think, and for me, I will say, I think it's such a nice perspective, and being able to feel comfortable in your body and really not caring, or being able to sort of let go of what other people's expectations of you are, is such a freeing thing. And it took, as I said, it took me a really long time to get there. And it certainly took me becoming, in a lot of ways, becoming more, I was going to say more masculine, but that's not true. But building a lot more muscle, and seeing my muscles and sort of going, oh, wow, this is a very different kind of shape and type of body that I've ever had. Growing up, especially growing up in the 90s, 80s and 90s, that was the waif chic, heroin chic kind of era. So women were being represented and being told to be smaller, more vulnerable. You know, you were expected, or the ideal woman was thin and small, and she took up very little space, and she looked,
and she had to have big breasts as well.
Yeah, big breasts, but not a big bum. That was a little bit later, but be really, really tiny and vulnerable and weak, and half asleep, so that you couldn't defend yourself. So you were expected to be small, vulnerable, take up less space. And as I've gotten older, and especially I've been lucky enough to join a specific gym, which is not actually a women's gym, but for whatever reason involves a lot of women who come and do boxing and do weightlifting and strength training. And now I'm surrounded by a group of women who are just going, yeah, I'm not going to live like that anymore. I'm not interested in being like that anymore. I want to be strong, and I want to be muscular, and I want to be powerful, and I want to take up as much space as I want to. And I really don't care who doesn't like it. And all of those women are sort of looking at each other and going, yeah, you look, you're fantastic. And any sort of comments that come about people's appearance is just in respect of, you look powerful and you look happy and you look healthy and you look strong, you know, and that's such a lovely, different way of being than I've ever been used to. Sorry, Bhavani, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something as well?
Oh, yeah, whatever you're saying was beautiful. So I put my hand up. I just wanted to add one of our models, Maddie. So I was talking to her and I was saying, we was doing a 5-minute quick session in Michael's class where everyone were acting as a model for portraits.
Mhm.
And that day I had my facial hair. I didn't I didn't clean it up or anything. And I said I was feeling so conscious about sitting on that table, and also for me to get on, because I had a spine issue. I can't get on to the height, and I was feeling very embarrassed about it. And then I was talking to Maddie and said, "You really are. I mean, it's really very scary to be a model." And then she said, you have to embrace whatever it is facially. It doesn't matter. You have hair. I have hair on my legs. So, I mean, until then, I was very conscious about going to the parlor, getting the. Sometimes now I really don't care. So, yeah, having those conversations also with other women is quite important sometimes to
Yes.
understand it is okay. Yeah, I just want to add that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that certainly sort of ties into what I was saying too, that the having a lot more conversations with women who are my age or younger or older, and just having that support from other women and understanding how kind of you know, unconditional and how wonderful it can be, something that I didn't particularly have that much of growing up. I had some very close female friends, but not many. And it's only been in later life that I've started to develop lots of relationships with other women that are just fantastic, wonderful, and not just women, also some non-binary people too. And it's made such a difference to my life. And even so I also do boxing, which some of you would know because I've talked about it before. Even boxing with women, and I see the men boxing together as well. And I've also done some sparring, some boxing against men. Thankfully, very, you know, good, respectful men who are not trying to prove anything or injure anyone. But the difference when women spar with women versus what I see of men sparring with men, probably I would say 50% of the men that I see sparring with other men are also kind and respectful and generous, you know, to each other. They'll go very hard during a round, but then afterwards they'll give each other a hug and say thank you, and, you know, maybe have a conversation about how things went. But then the other 50% are, you know, to put it very bluntly, real dickheads about it, and they're trying to prove something. They're trying to hurt someone. They'll, you know, tease and taunt each other, and it's very ugly, and it's very competitive and pretty horrible. Whereas I've only met maybe a handful, very small handful of women who are the same. The vast majority of women that I've boxed with, sparred with, and these are people who are going very hard during the sparring session, like, you know, not pulling their punches. But afterwards, it's hugs and thank yous and you know, respectful appreciation, and really appreciating each other and the fact that we're putting our health on the line for each other so that we can both get stronger and we can both learn something. And that's really understood within the women's boxing community. Whereas I think there's so much more there's so much more sort of people trying to prove something within the men's boxing community, whereas women seem to be less likely to try and prove something and more likely that they're trying to actually, you know, kind of support each other and help each other become stronger, become better, and become, you know, overall yeah, just better, fitter, stronger, all of that kind of stuff. So it's very interesting, the sort of the gender disparity even within that community as well. Well, that was quite a lot about yeah, intersectionality and inclusivity. Did anyone else want to add anything? I know it was me, Jane, Bhavani all sort of said quite a bit. Arrow said a couple of things, Lucinda as well, but did anyone else want to just comment on your own kind of personal experiences with any of this, body politics or anything else. Feel free to pop something in the chat as well if you like. If not, then or you can still type something, but I'll move on to the next slide. Oh,
Can
yes.
you repeat the question, please?
Oh, I just said, did anyone else want to add anything before we sort of move on to the next slide? Jane's asked, any thoughts about naked children? Yeah, it's a good question. I know the image that you were talking about, the photographer, but I can't remember his name. It happened a little while ago. I want to say maybe 15 years ago. It was, I think, an Australian photographer who's quite well known. And he did a series, like a series of sort of portraits and photographs, and some of them involved, as you said, naked adolescents. And the way that he sort of talked about it and represented it, I do believe this, I think he was trying to be, respectful and celebratory in a very non-sexual way. But it was extremely controversial and he did get into a lot of trouble with it. And people very much sort of, I think there was a response of, even if this is your intention, the ramifications are out of your control, and you can't stop people from interpreting this in a very sexual way. So yeah, look, I think it is tricky. I think when it comes to particularly representations of, and this is just my thoughts, particularly representations of specific children or young people. So if you are doing a portrait or you're doing, like it's clearly recognizable who that person, who that child is, then yeah, the chances of that being controversial are pretty high. But then, if we kind of think more broadly about like representations of cherubs, or if you were going to do a more sort of mythological work and you were going to represent Cupid, there are lots of representations of children in that way, and naked children in that way. I mean, there's representations of naked baby Jesus and naked baby Krishna, and it's from that perspective, if that's something that you want to include in your art, well, if it's a tiny little cherub, then it's not, it's like a mythological or religious kind of, being or figure. But are you going to use a reference for that? Yeah, gumnut babies, exactly. If you're using a reference for that, then the conversation around consent can be very, very tricky. So yeah, it's one of those things I don't know. I don't have a clear kind of answer in my mind about it. I feel like, as I said, if it's not a specific person or child, and it's more like a general representation of something that is, like a young person, I don't know.
Yeah, I just brought it up because I just have that same, I don't know. It is because I look back now at a lot of books that I used to look at years ago, like children's books that had naked children in them, and now I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Whereas I didn't back then. Yeah. So now I feel uncomfortable whenever I see any drawing of a naked child, even Cupid's now. Just make me feel uncomfortable, like, oh, was that really sort of some sort of perversion that drawing all those little, like even the gumnut babies, as I say.
Yeah.
It's just become such an issue. So I don't know, but I just think it's a tricky issue.
I think it's a tricky issue too, because I also don't think it's right to say, oh, you can't have any representations of, children, nude children, naked children. Because I'm not sure that that's right either, because as you say, especially when it comes to things like picture books, there's the gumnut babies, I mean, I was going to say you'd be hard pressed to make that sexual, but then I guess certain people, you know, can make anything sexual. But to me, there's actually like an innocence, there's a sweetness and an innocence to little baby gum nuts running around, you know, without a care in the world. And when we think about children, a lot of young children, and this was me when I was a baby, there's so often you're like, I don't want to wear clothes. Much prefer to be, especially summertime. No, clothes off. I want to be running around the house naked. And people making you feel uncomfortable about that. You know, there's a certain point in your life where no one's made you feel uncomfortable about it, and then suddenly you're made to feel uncomfortable about it. And trying to understand why that's happening, why it's suddenly inappropriate when it wasn't before, I think is a really difficult moment in kids' lives. But it's also a difficult moment for, you know, the parents or the guardians to try and navigate that situation with the children and sort of say, well, we can't, you know, you can't just keep throwing your clothes off and running around nude anymore. Yeah. What's anyone else's thoughts on it?
But the increase in the cases that we're seeing with pedophilia, I think protecting the child's privacy is quite important, because we were all, someone ran naked around the house because when diapers and all were not there. So we were happily playing and nothing mattered then. But now I think the amount of cases increasing, and from the most unexpected people. So I think it's good to protect, and also have seen on first hand a child of less than 1 year, 7 months is being photographed with different dresses, like I think 15 types of dresses the child was changing for in a day, and I felt that was too much even for an adult, just to get the cute photographs of the baby. And I feel it's a kind of cruelty. With just thinking about capturing the cuteness, we are forgetting that you know, she's a child and she needs to rest. She needs to be taken care of. I think photography has become an obsession in this case, and I'm not sure how many photos we'll go back and look at. So I think it has to tone down. I would not say completely, but it has to tone down a lot. And considering the kind of cases that we are listening, I would not encourage nudity of child.
It's got me sort of thinking a little bit too about so when I go to Ethiopia, and I'm going to go again in January, so particularly the remote tribes that we go to, they're traditionally spend a lot of time completely naked. Everyone spends a lot of time completely naked. In more recent years, people have started to wear like it's almost like a multi-purpose blanket kind of thing, and they'll sort of wear it around their shoulders, or okay, Riley's just heading off. All good. I'll see you next week, Riley. Thank you. And they'll sort of wear like a blanket, and it's good for a lot of things, obviously, because you can also sleep with it. It also sort of makes a convenient pocket that you can then carry things around with. But even as recently as maybe sort of 50 or 60 years ago, this is specifically the Suri tribe I'm thinking of, most people were naked and would just walk around naked quite comfortably. Even now, the majority of the women will walk around with one breast exposed, because the way that they wear the blankets, they just put it across one shoulder. As more and more tourists are coming to visit them, the women are starting to cover up more, and it is the influence of people visiting them and people photographing them. And it's not that they feel as though they should be covering up, it's that photographers keep asking them to cover up. And it is a very, it's kind of interesting and I think very complex, seeing the way that their relationship to nudity is changing as people are starting to be around them more and observe them more. And I'm very close to a girl called Nalaguru, who my mum sort of, for all intents and purposes, adopted. She hasn't like legally adopted her, but she pays for her education. She pays for her to go to school and to be boarded in Addis, which was at the request of Nalaguru's mother, who my mum has become very, very close friends with. And so I've traveled with Nalu now a few times. And the last time we went back to the tribe, she wore a t-shirt the whole time underneath. She put the blanket on as soon as we arrived, but she was wearing a t-shirt the whole time, and she didn't want to take the t-shirt off. And I talked to her about it, and I said, you know, is there, do you feel different now? Do you feel as though your relationship to your own body has changed because you've left the tribe for this period of time, and now you're in Addis, which is quite a large city, and you're sort of, you know, being around lots of different people, and seeing, you know, feeling differently about your body? And she said, yes. She said she now doesn't feel comfortable being naked as she was previously. Even down to, there was a point where we sort of finished photographing, everyone was kind of having a rest, and Nalu said that her and her friends wanted to go down to a swimming hole and have a swim, and she asked if I wanted to come with them. And I said, absolutely, you know, couldn't wait. It was going to be heaps of fun. It's a lovely hot day. When we got down there, all of the kids just got naked. It didn't matter how old or young they were, everyone got naked. I didn't have my camera, I wasn't going to take any photos, nothing. But so everyone was feeling very comfortable. But Nalu didn't. She wanted to wear a swimming costume, and I was wearing a swimming costume. And I just thought that that's such an interesting impact, you know, of someone who up until a few years ago would have been absolutely 100%. She would have been in the pool or in the swimming hole completely naked with all of her friends and the people that she's grown up with. But now it's changed, and now she feels differently about it. So yeah, it's that these sorts of questions, I think, as you say, Bhavani, it's important to sort of protect people's privacy. And when we're talking about young people, we're talking about children. Consent is something that, you know, we've made some decisions about when we think consent is able to be given, which, depending on where you are, might be 16, might be 18. But prior to that, it then comes down to the decision of the parents. And I think, yeah, especially in a world of social media and photography, and where everyone has very quick and easy access to, you know, photographs and images of other people, we do have to be maybe a little bit more protective, a little bit more thoughtful about what we're putting out there in the world. But yeah, interesting. I found it. I also did find the name of the artist. It was Bill Henson. So if you felt like looking him up, Bill Henson.
Now you say the name, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, what I Googled just while we were sort of talking, then I Googled photographer controversy adolescent. And
you got it.
Yeah, there was a couple of things that came up, but then when I saw the name Bill Henson, I went, oh yeah, that was who it was. I remember. All right. This, if you've seen Ron Mueck's work, or you may or may not have seen his work, it's pretty phenomenal. So he does large scale and miniature scale sculptural works. He's a very interesting artist to have a look at. So some of these are massive, some of them are tiny. So he does a lot of work that's representative of the human figure, but also very much sort of challenging or examining scale and life and death and science and all that kind of stuff. His work is, yeah, really interesting. I don't think I've ever seen any of his in person, but there are a few pieces around around Australia. He's an Australian artist. Has anyone actually seen his work up close? No? He was I think from memory, from what I remember, he was a special effects artist, and the works that he do are, yeah, just hyper realistic, but he will go to the effort of even, you know, putting individual hairs into people, into these extremely lifelike sculptures. Fascinating stuff. And there's another one. So this is the normal sized person, and this is the little teeny tiny sculpture that Mueck has done. So let's talk about some of the artists that inspire you, artists that work with the human form that you are interested in or inspired by. We've sort of talked a lot about our own experiences and thought a lot about different kinds of representations in the human body, but what would be some artists, you know, one or two you can name that work with the human form that interest or inspire you? Everyone can answer this one. Jane said Michelangelo. Yeah, he's interesting. What is it particularly about Michelangelo that you are interested in or inspired by?
I just the way he represents he mainly draws men, doesn't he? Like the Sistine Chapel and just the nice muscular bodies that he draws.
Arguably, when you say he mostly draws men, yeah, there's an argument, I think, for he may never have seen a naked woman.
Yeah, because I think I've seen a naked woman that he's drawn, and it looks her breast looks really peculiar. I just can't actually. I remember thinking that's not very good. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's fair to say that in his time during the sort of Renaissance period, that there weren't naked female models.
Right. Yeah.
So unless he was looking at, you know, a naked woman that he knew, like a, you know, girlfriend or wife or something, he would not have seen in his academic work, his academic development, he would not have worked with a naked woman. So he might have.
I think he was thought to be a gay man as
He
well.
was thought to be gay, yeah. Well, he
Yeah.
was certainly a bachelor, certainly a confirmed bachelor. Yeah, he never married. He had there were no famous girlfriends or anything like that. So it is possible that he never actually saw a naked woman. And yeah, certainly a lot of the representations that you see of supposedly female bodies that he does seem to have physiques that look more or less like men, except they've got a pair of coconuts on the pectoral muscles. There's one sculpture, I think it's Medici, it's one of the Medici what's called tombs, that's like particularly bad. I think it's Medici tomb. Oh no, this one. It's this one. Medici Chapel. Go back. Yeah. Where is she? Here. Her boobs are crazy.
I think that's the one. The one I was thinking of. Yeah, it does look like a man's body with two breasts popped on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not, yeah. Look, you don't want to body shame anyone. I mean, maybe that is what she looked like, but it looks like a really bad boob job. Really.
Yeah. It's not very soft, and it's kind of,
yeah.
It's just an abnormal shape. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see really clearly defined pectoral muscles underneath it, and then these very strange things sitting on top. So yeah, possible you didn't actually see any naked women. No, and Bhavani just said, does it have to be an artist, a visual artist? No, it absolutely does not have to be a visual artist. Was there someone you wanted to mention?
I was heavily inspired by, so the first nude works were introduced to me by my dad. When we went to the temples, we used to observe the carvings, And he used to say, look up. And then we used to look up. And the interesting part is there was a nudity, but the focus went on to this storytelling in spite of the nudity and the some voyeurism present. So that's how, for me, the admiration of art, irrespective of what it is. So it was my father who introduced this. So he said, look up, and that's the story, and look the carvings, and look. So, and I really like, and also I like there are some places where you celebrate different parts of the human, of a woman, and I mean those cultures, and they're celebrated, not looked in forwarded manner. But yeah, those were my early introductions and inspirations to look at things in a different perspective, other than because usually. Girl fathers will be very protective about them and would say, don't look at them, don't do this. But my dad was very open to say, look at this, look, admire the carving, and look what the artist has put into it. Look at the muzzles and the detailing that they have done on a plain stone. So these were my inspirations. Yeah, it's actually very associated with my conversations with my father about the storytelling and how that would impact the people who would, in those days, people who would come in, and how it's celebrated in a very different perspective. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
my
that's awesome. Yeah, I love that. And that's still, I mean, I know it's not a specific artist, but it's definitely still being inspired by other people's art making. Yeah, that's lovely. And I think you are, you know, I thank goodness that your dad was like that, really, to sort of, as you say, draw your attention to it instead of saying don't look and, you know, don't think about it. He's saying, no, you should look. That's yeah, that's lovely. Arrow has said in the chat, Janine Antony and Maria Abravic, yes. Let's have a look at those two. Hang on, just pop names in here. So tell us about Janine and Antony while we're having a look here. So she's a performance artist. So using her body as both a tool and a source of meaning within the conceptual framework of her practice. Early methods involve transforming unique materials such as chocolate and soap through habitual everyday processes like bathing, eating, and sleeping to create sculptural works and installations. So Ara says, I like that lick and lather. I studied it in school. So it's a chocolate and soap. Interesting. Very nice, yeah. And performance art pieces as well. So there's some nice sort of combinations of photography and sculptural works. And then the other one you mentioned was Marina Abravic. Also another conceptual artist and performance artist. Yeah, nice. Let's have a look. Sound pieces, video works, installations, photographs, or performances. So what particularly do you like of her work? That's fun. Okay, so she's another person who does audience interaction and performances with her body. So I assume this piece here that we're looking at is the only way to get from one room to the next is to pass between two naked bodies. And the changing, revolving cast of two naked bodies. Oh no, you can go around that way. Yeah, interesting. So we did have the look earlier at nude and naked bodies. Is there any, for those of you who had some discussion points about that, any additional thoughts about this? Comparing, contrasting, similar feelings, different feelings? Did you say, I don't remember, Ara, did you say anything about how you felt about that, the piece that we were looking at before?
I don't know. I feel that it's when making work about nudity or naked bodies, then there is a difference between when you make it graphic and when you represent it. I think my feeling was, where do you want to draw the line and where the artist is intending to go with it?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's,
Yeah.
I think that that's such a good point too, is that the intention is important as much as we've talked quite a lot today about you can't completely control people's interpretation. The intention is important. Jane or Bhavani, what did you think? Like if we compare this work or aspects of this work with the previous work, do we have any thoughts or feelings about it?
Well, I immediately liked it that the nudes weren't lying on the ground. Somehow it was kind of more respectful or something, and also that it was humorous. I liked the humor of having to squeeze between the naked people, and you know, so I didn't feel like the naked people were being so exploited there.
Yeah, I feel like there's, and this is probably partially about the intent as well, is that it becomes instead of that kind of voyeuristic aspect of, well, as the observer, you can kind of stand wherever you like and you can, you know, as you said, you could perv at them a little bit from behind a pillar or whatever. In this case, with Marina Abramovic's work, you actually have to, like, you're the one who's put in a position of vulnerability because they're standing there, they seem quite comfortable, and now you have to kind of be uncomfortable trying to get between them, and I think it sort of flips the tables on the observer, because the observer becomes the person who is having to interact with or try not to interact with the nude people, rather than it being the other way around.
Yeah, I agree.
I had a thought that sparked, which is a little hypocrisy. Something called like everyone. I think we all are at. Every human being is at a certain level hypocrite. At the same time, weighing between right, wrong, and the gray area. We are all at a percentage level, a different in whatever the needs, based on the needs. We are a little perverted at some percentages vary, maybe 0.1 or 1% or whatever it is. So I think this artist is going to is actually challenging that.
Yeah.
I really, I mean, it's a there you are. It's almost like a confrontation, or like, would you choose and would you, yeah. I think that kind of questions, that kind of brings the hypocrite, the opposite side of us, or the hypocrisy, or whatever the underlying self of us in this particular. I don't know. Somehow when I saw this, I felt the same. I felt something like that. It was quite interesting because, in that, like Jane said in the previous one, it was, the models were at the a vulnerable point, and here the audience are at the vulnerable thing, and it's a choice. It's a choice you make, and so that's I really liked it, challenging the audience rather than the models, because they definitely should have consent of the models for doing this.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think as you say, it sort of it makes the viewer more vulnerable and makes them examine their feelings rather than being able to be passive about the way that they're observing the human body. They have to be very conscious of the way that they're observing and interacting with nude bodies. And I thought it was interesting too that even though, it might be most of the models, the bodies were, we might say, sort of conventionally attractive in the sense that they were all, relatively sort of thin people. We did see one of each gender being represented, and we also saw people of different kind of, skin color or ethnic backgrounds or cultural backgrounds as well. So it wasn't all just thin white women, which I think is also a bit of a distinction too, because and it seemed to be a lot of different people. So it wasn't just the same models having to stand there for hours and hours. So yeah, and what a great contrast. So thank you so much for sharing that, Arrow, because I think it was a very, very good and very important contrast to what we saw before. So much so that I'm going to save this and I'm going to put it into the PowerPoint for next year when I do this workshop again, so that everyone, so we've got that comparison basis, because I think it will prompt different kinds of conversations. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. We haven't gotten very far. It's nearly 1 o'clock and we're only up to element 2. So we are going to have to finish this one next week. We'll still have a little look. We'll keep going for another 5 minutes or so. But look, I think these assessment tutorials, we're always sort of trying to get through an assessment and, kind of talk about what's involved in those assessments. But I'm very happy when we can also just have some good general conversations about art that allow us to think about what we're doing and think about what's out there in the world. But it is pretty funny that this is now going to go on to 3 weeks. We will have been talking about this topic. So element 2, we'll just touch on what this one is about. So this is starting element 2, which is choosing your artist of influence. So we've already sort of spoken then about artists who do inspire you or who do influence you. And so thinking about whenever we ask you to choose an artist of influence, generally what we will also then continue to ask you to do will be, find something within their work that you are interested in or inspired by, and then experiment with those techniques or those approaches and kind of discuss what you learnt and whether or not you would then continue to use or adapt those techniques or approaches into your own work. So with this example, this is actually our tutor, Peter Mackey, who's who's our printmaking tutor. And in this particular image, he's sort of flipping the traditional chiaroscuro technique, which is chiaroscuro meaning light and dark, which usually involves a very dark background and a more brightly lit subject to create that kind of high contrast. But here he's kind of gone the opposite. So he's got quite a light background and then an almost completely silhouetted figure, but it still has that element of the chiaroscuro, the really high contrast. So if you were to choose someone like Peter Mackie as your artist of influence, things that you might experiment with or interpret or be inspired by could be using just straightforwardly similar techniques with a modeling class, doing similar kind of approach of the high contrast light and dark, but with a different material, doing the same thing but with color, or attempting the technique, but in introducing experimentation with a different element of, you know, drawing or painting styles, such as scribbling. If we're thinking about some of the artists that we already mentioned, so for example, let's talk about Michelangelo. Before, Jane said that Michelangelo is an artist who inspires her. What would be something that you would take away or experiment with technique-wise that you have learned from or observed in Michelangelo's work?
I think he does drawings with, it's probably charcoal, and he also does them with ink.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'd try doing an ink drawing the way he's done it.
Yeah, that's great. So yes, Michelangelo did do drawings with ink. He also did use charcoal. He also used sanguine and white chalk. A lot of artists in the Renaissance period used those. So yeah, experimenting with the materials that he used, that's a good example of experimentation. Another example of what you could experiment with being inspired by him, Michelangelo was very famous for being a form drawing artist as opposed to a tonal drawing artist. If you've been in any drawing classes with me, you probably would have heard those distinctions before, but I can also give you...
So do you mean more drawing the shapes and the edges rather than the tones?
Yes. So actually, you know what? Why am I even looking here? I've got examples in my folders. So if we are prioritizing the tones, which a tonal drawing will do, if we prioritize the tones, then what it means is we will put in the tones regardless of whether the form, the shape of things gets lost. Whereas if we are prioritizing the form, it means that we will describe things even if they would otherwise be obscured by shadow. Let me just find a couple of examples for you here. So two people that we can talk about who are at a very similar time. Da Vinci was a tonal artist and Michelangelo was a form drawing artist. But I'll give you a better example than Da Vinci as well. Da Vinci's obviously a great artist, but there's a better example of a tonal drawing that I can show you, which would be this one. And you might have seen this before. So this is George Seurat, a portrait of his mother. And this is a tonal drawing in that there are no hard edges and everything is being described just by the light. So anything that can't be described by the light or is obscured by shadow is gone. Like her ear, for example. He's also, you know, if we really zoom in, there's a certain point where the shape essentially kind of disappears. But when we zoom out, it resolves because the tones are correct. So it's a picture that is only made with the tones. There's no explicit form, and anything, it's prioritizing what the light is showing us rather than the form or the three-dimensional structure of things. Now, by comparison, if we have a look at Michelangelo, here, we've got a drawing. This is for one of the Sistine Chapel characters or people. When we look at this particular image, if we try and figure out where is the light source coming from, it's not super clear. We might say, well, it's sort of coming from the top left-hand side here because it's hitting this shoulder and it's sort of hitting parts of the face. But then other areas over here on this arm and the back seem to also have a decent amount of light because he has prioritized the shape of things. He's prioritized the structure, the form. And there is nothing being lost in the shadows. Everything is being described, even to the point of the light source. We lose clarity on where the light source is because we've prioritized the shape and structure of everything and made everything very explicit. And again, so having a look at that and then compare it to the previous one. With this one, we definitely know where the light source is. The light source is everything. It's the only thing that's giving us an understanding of what we're looking at. Whereas with the Michelangelo example, he's described everything using lines and tones that are going around the structure and around the form. So that would also be something that you could take away from Michelangelo, is doing a form drawing as opposed to a tonal drawing, especially if you have been, up until recently, mostly been doing, you know, kind of tonal work. All right. I think we'll call it a day there because it is 1 o'clock. For next week, especially if you didn't give us an artist of influence, I would like to hear of an artist of influence. For you, Arrow, maybe have a think about, because particularly the two artists that you mentioned are both sort of performance artists. So thinking about how you can experiment with or interpret their work in a way that would sort of tie into your own work in with the human body. I'd be very interested to hear that. So have a think about that. And next week we'll talk about that. And then, yeah, for anyone else who's still sort of listening and working, for you, Bhavani, as well, maybe have a think about a specific artist. Because as much as what you mentioned with the sculptures in India is really amazing, we probably do need, like, you know, to be able to reference an artist, we would need an artist of influence. And by all means, you could, you know, do some research and find a specific artist who creates sculptural work, and that would be also fine. But it would have to be someone you'd be able to name, and then talk about how they've influenced your work. All right. Any questions, comments, anything else before we wrap up?
Good.
All good? All right. We'll see you all next week. Have a good weekend, everybody.